GE engineered the most powerful locomotives on the planet, and America scrapped almost all of them within years. Why? 8,500 horsepower per unit, burning the cheapest fuel a refinery could sell, dragging trains across the West that no diesel alive could handle. Union Pacific had gambled on gas turbine technology born from the jet age, and for one brief, thunderous era, it paid off. Then every advantage these giants possessed began to collapse one by one. Freight crossing the American West after World War II was a test of brute force and endurance. Union Pacific's Mainline from Ogden to Cheyenne was hammered daily by trains that tipped the scales at over 5,000 tons. These were not rare exceptions. By the late 1940s, long-haul freights of this size became routine, stretching for a mile or more and carrying everything from coal to manufactured goods. The challenge was the land itself. The Wasatch Range and the High Plains threw up grades of 1% or steeper, and that single number, 1%, meant that for every 100 feet forward, a train gained a foot in elevation. It sounds gentle, but for a fully loaded train, it was a wall that never ended. The old steam giants, like the 4884 Big Boy, had set the standard, pulling 3,600-ton trains up these slopes. But even their muscle was stretched thin by the growing post-war economy. Diesel electrics, the new hope in American railroading, arrived with a promise of efficiency and lower maintenance. Yet in practice, these first-generation diesels, EMDF units and F7s, could not match the continuous tractive effort needed for the ever-heavier trains. A single diesel could deliver around 100,000 pounds of pulling force, but that was not enough. Railroads had to lash together 3 or 4 engines just to clear the grades, multiplying crews, fuel, and maintenance headaches. Union Pacific's mechanical department faced a problem with no easy answer. They needed a locomotive that could do the work of an entire consist of diesels, something that could deliver uninterrupted power over the harshest stretches of track. The stakes were clear. If they could not move more tonnage with fewer engines, the railroad's costs would balloon and its competitive edge would vanish. The hunt began for a new kind of motive power, one that could close the gap between what the railroad demanded and what the technology of the day could deliver. Steep grades and swelling freight loads were not just obstacles. They were the reason to gamble on something as radical as a gas turbine. General Electric's engineers studied the problem with a sense of both urgency and possibility. The answer they proposed was radical. Replace the heavy, piston-driven diesel engine with a gas turbine, a machine more at home in jet aircraft than on railroad tracks. Where a diesel-electric locomotive used a big internal combustion engine to spin a generator, the turbine-electric design swapped that out for a high-speed turbine, essentially a jet engine driving a generator instead of a propeller. The turbine spun at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, producing a continuous, searing blast of energy that turned the generator, which in turn sent electricity to traction motors on the axles. The result was a locomotive with a single, streamlined power source, capable of producing far more horsepower in a smaller, lighter package than any diesel engine of the era. The basic architecture was deceptively simple. Air was compressed, mixed with fuel, and ignited in a combustion chamber. The resulting hot gases rushed through turbine blades, spinning the shaft at incredible speed. This shaft was directly coupled to a generator, which supplied current to the electric motors that drove the wheels. Unlike a diesel, which had to manage the jerky motion of pistons and the wear of hundreds of moving parts, the turbine was all about smooth, constant rotation. It promised not just raw power, but also fewer mechanical breakdowns, at least in theory. For the GE team, the potential was staggering. A single turbine could deliver more horsepower than 3 or 4 diesel units lashed together, while eliminating the need for multiple crews and complex maintenance schedules. The generator's high revolutions per minute output allowed for a compact design, and the electric transmission meant that the locomotive could apply steady tractive effort across long grades, exactly what Union Pacific needed for its mile-long trains. The turbine electric principle seemed to offer the perfect marriage of jet-age power and railroad reliability. It was a leap of faith, but for a railroad facing the limits of both steam and early diesel, it was a leap worth taking. The question was not just whether the technology could work, but whether it could be tamed and made reliable enough for the relentless demands of Western freight. Union Pacific's leadership faced a crossroads in late 1948. The railroad's board and mechanical department weighed the risks of unproven technology against the certainty of rising costs and strained resources. Conventional wisdom in the industry said to stick with steam or wait for diesels to catch up, but Union Pacific was not interested in waiting. They needed a solution that could handle the relentless mile-long freights pounding over the Wasatch and Rockies, something no other American railroad had yet dared to try. The decision was not made in a vacuum. Board directives drove the search for a locomotive that could consolidate power, cut the number of engines and crews, and keep the railroad ahead of its rivals. The promise of a single unit with the pulling force of an entire diesel lash-up running on cheap Bunker C fuel was too tempting to ignore. In November 1948, Union Pacific signed a contract with General Electric and its partner Alco to build a prototype gas turbine electric locomotive. This was a bet not just on horsepower, but on a new kind of operational math, one that assumed fuel would stay cheap and that maintenance could be tamed by the turbine's simplicity. The contract called for General Electric to supply the turbine generator set and Alco to build the frame, with the understanding that if the prototype performed, more units would follow. The railroad committed not just money, but its reputation as a technological leader in the American West. Union Pacific's managers knew the risks: the turbine's appetite for fuel, the unknowns of high-temperature operation, and the challenge of adapting jet-age hardware to the rails. But the alternative, falling behind, running ever longer trains with ever more engines, was a future they refused to accept. The boldness of the decision set the stage for a chapter of American railroading that would be defined as much by ambition as by the realities that followed. Prototype number 50 rolled out of General Electric's Erie plant in late 1948, painted in Union Pacific yellow and gray, but still very much an experiment. The real test would not come in a lab or on a factory siding, but on the Mainline across the American heartland. In the spring of 1949, General Electric's engineering team and Union Pacific's own veteran crews took the turbine on a series of punishing hauls between Council Bluffs and Ogden, a corridor that had humbled countless locomotives before it. The assignment was simple: prove that a single gas turbine electric could move a 3,000-ton freight train at sustained speeds, facing the same grades and curves that defined the railroad's daily grind. The numbers from those runs caught the industry's attention. Number 50 handled a full consist at 60 miles per hour, matching the schedules set by the best steam and diesel lash-ups. Crew diaries from the time recall the surreal experience of riding behind a machine that sounded more like a jet than a locomotive. The exhaust thundered through the canyons, leaving a trail of startled livestock and wide-eyed onlookers. Engineers described the turbine's throttle as both thrilling and unpredictable. Response lagged behind the lever, but once the power hit, it came on in a rush, relentless and smooth. Test engineers from General Electric rode every mile, making adjustments, logging temperatures, listening for the telltale whine of bearings or the faintest sign of blade trouble. Each successful run added confidence. The prototype didn't just survive the ordeal, it delivered the uninterrupted, high-speed power Union Pacific was desperate to find. Number 50's performance in 1949 convinced the railroad's leadership that this was more than a laboratory curiosity. The decision to move from a single prototype to a full production order was made not in a boardroom, but out on the Mainline, where the numbers and the roar of the turbine spoke for themselves. By 1958, Union Pacific and General Electric unveiled a machine that seemed to defy the limits of railroad engineering. The third-generation gas turbine electric locomotive, instantly christened the Big Blow. 30 of these giants rolled out between 1958 and 1961, each one a twin-unit colossus permanently coupled and stretching more than 160 feet from pilot to tender. The headline number was impossible to ignore: 8,500 horsepower, delivered not as a fleeting burst, but as a continuous, relentless output. No other locomotive in the world could match it. Not the big boy steamers of the previous decade, not the latest diesels from EMD or General Electric. The Big Blow dwarfed them all, both in size and in raw, sustained power. General Electric's publicists called them the world's most powerful locomotives. And for once, the marketing did not exaggerate. The heart of each unit was a jet-age turbine, spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, channeling searing energy into a generator that fed 6 traction motors. The effect was immediate and almost theatrical. A single Big Blow could muscle a 6,000-ton train over the Wasatch grades, a feat that once demanded a lash-up of 4 or 5 diesels and multiple crews. The turbine's exhaust roared like a jet engine, earning the locomotive its nickname and leaving a trail of awe and complaints in equal measure. The architecture was as audacious as the numbers. Each Big Blow consisted of 2 locomotive units, permanently paired, and a dedicated fuel tender that carried enough bunker C oil for a cross-country run. The continuous 8,500 horsepower rating was not just a technical boast. It was the answer to Union Pacific's most pressing operational problem. With fewer locomotives and crews, the railroad could move more freight, more efficiently, over the harshest terrain in North America. But the stakes were as high as the horsepower. Every mile these machines ran, the economic gamble grew larger. The Big Blow's power was unmatched, but so was its appetite. The next question was whether the numbers behind the spectacle could keep up with the ambition. Bunker C oil was the ace up Union Pacific's sleeve. In the 1950s, this heavy, black residue was the leftover dregs of the refining process. What was left after gasoline, kerosene, and diesel were skimmed off for higher-paying customers. Refineries along the Gulf Coast and in Wyoming had mountains of the stuff. For most industries, Bunker C was little more than waste, sold off at a deep discount just to clear the tanks. That discount was staggering. In the mid-1950s, a barrel of Bunker C cost as little as a third of what diesel went for. For a railroad burning thousands of gallons a day, the math was irresistible. Union Pacific signed contracts with refiners that guaranteed a steady supply at rock-bottom prices. The railroad could fill the enormous tenders behind its turbines with Bunker C and still spend less per mile than if it ran the same trains on diesel. A gas turbine electric locomotive burned more fuel per mile than a diesel locomotive. But the price gap was so wide that the overall cost per mile often came out lower. On paper, this was the ultimate hedge, unmatched horsepower fueled by the cheapest energy on the market. The fuel's energy density played a role too. Bunker C packed nearly as much punch per gallon as diesel, and the turbine's large tanks, sometimes as much as 24,000 gallons, meant fewer stops and longer runs. This was more than a technical footnote. It shaped the entire business case for the gas turbine locomotive. Every ton of freight moved by turbine power, every mile conquered through the Rockies, was underwritten by the assumption that Bunker C would stay cheap and plentiful. The economics looked so good that Union Pacific was willing to overlook the fuel's quirks, its need for constant heating, its stubborn viscosity, because the bottom line was unbeatable. For a brief window, Bunker C made the gas turbine electric locomotives look not just powerful, but smart. But as the decade closed, the very market forces that made Bunker C a bargain would begin to shift, and the numbers would start to tell a different story. The sound of a big blow at full throttle was impossible to ignore. Crews described the turbine's exhaust as a jet engine let loose on the plains, a constant high-pitched roar that rattled windows and sent livestock running for cover. Along the Mainline, residents filed complaints with city halls and railroad offices describing nights broken by the scream of turbines echoing through canyons and across small towns. Letters from Salt Lake City to the outskirts of Los Angeles told the same story. Children startled awake, conversations drowned out, and nerves frayed by the relentless vibration that seeped through walls and floors. The noise was more than a nuisance. It was a force that shaped daily life along the tracks. Union Pacific faced mounting pressure as communities pushed back and city councils began to act. Ordinances in California and other states banned the turbines from entering city limits, citing violations of local noise codes. The Big Blow's power came with a very public price, forcing the railroad to reroute its most advanced locomotives away from populated corridors and into the emptier stretches of mountain and desert. For all their engineering brilliance, these machines found themselves unwelcome, their thunderous presence a liability that no amount of horsepower could erase. Every shift in the Union Pacific shops began with the same ritual: heating up Bunker C. The turbines demanded their fuel be thinned to the consistency of hot syrup, which meant firing up electric or steam heaters and waiting 30, sometimes 45 minutes before the engine could even think about turning over. Shop logs from North Platte and Cheyenne read like a litany of patience, crews watching the clock, waiting for the green light before a single wheel could move. Even idling, the turbines burned through nearly 7 gallons of oil every hour, a hidden penalty that crept into the bottom line during every yard hold or crew change. But it was out on the line that the true costs revealed themselves. The turbine's appetite was relentless, devouring 10 gallons of fuel per mile at full throttle. Maintenance records tell of a different kind of hunger, one measured in labor hours and replacement parts. Turbine blades, exposed to searing heat and the corrosive sulfur in Bunker C, wore out fast. Corrosion didn't just mean lost efficiency, it meant shutdowns, expensive overhauls, and in the worst cases, catastrophic failures. Shop foremen recall blade replacements that ran over $250,000 and overhaul cycles that chewed up 3,000 man-hours per unit. Fires in the heater compartments were a constant threat. Each incident logged, each one a reminder that raw power came with a price. For the men who kept the turbines running, the promise of jet-age efficiency faded under the weight of daily wear, rising costs, and the grinding reality of keeping these machines on the rails. By the late 1960s, the ground beneath the gas turbine locomotives began to shift. The cheap Bunker C oil that once made them a financial coup was now in demand from new industries, petrochemical plants, marine shipping, and power stations. Refineries, no longer eager to offload their heaviest residue, raised prices. The gap between Bunker C and diesel fuel narrowed with every new contract. Union Pacific's cost per mile advantage evaporated almost overnight. Turbine crews watched as the numbers turned against them. What had once been a third the price of diesel rose to parity and then beyond. At the same time, diesel technology surged ahead. EMD's SD45 and GE's U36C arrived on the scene, offering over 3,600 horsepower per unit, with better fuel economy and far lower maintenance costs. These new diesels did not need to be coddled with preheaters or special fuel tenders. They did not shake communities awake or require overhaul after every few thousand hours. For managers in Omaha, the calculus was suddenly clear. The turbines, still the world's most powerful locomotives, were now the most expensive to run. Withdrawals began in August 1968, with the first 4 big blows retired. More followed through 1969, and by February 1970, the last of the fleet was gone from revenue service. Scrapping contracts were signed, and the turbines disappeared almost as quickly as they had arrived. Only 2 escaped the torch. UP-18 is at the Illinois Railway Museum, and UP-26 is in St. Louis, silent witnesses to a time when power alone seemed to promise the future. Power alone doesn't guarantee survival, not in railroading, not in industry. Today, every innovation faces the same unforgiving math: fuel price, maintenance, and competition. The gas turbines proved that even the giants fall when the numbers turn. That irony still haunts every bold idea pitched in boardrooms today. The lesson? Brilliance means nothing if it can't pay its own way. What do you think? Would you have made the same call?